Let's say that a room is like a painting. If a room is like a painting, then the walls are like blank canvas. We're trained to look first at what's on the canvas rather than to see the canvas itself. But I'd like to give you permission this morning to refocus a bit and allow your gaze to settle and to look behind the pictures on the walls and the shifting light on the walls and just onto the walls themselves. Look hard. 300 million years ago, in the Paleozoic era, the place where you're sitting right now was at the bottom of a sea. A big sea, warm, shallow, and brimming with life. That's why you can find shark teeth today in the western part of the state. Now, in this sea, there were uncounted creatures of massive variety. And as they lived, they grew shells around themselves and they protected themselves. Calcium carbonate. And when those organisms died, their shells fell to the seafloor, and over millions and millions of years, they became ground down, compacted, bound together into the sedimentary rock we call limestone. Specifically, this is Kansas Silverdale limestone. Dense, strong, good for building. And after its 300 million year nap in the ground, it was quarried in Cowley County, 3 hours south of here, a few miles from the border. It was blown out, cut out, transported here, laid out in walls, tooled and cleaned. Look again at the walls. At first glance, these stones may seem to have been set just a bit randomly, but with a little patience, the patterns begin to emerge. There can be order set amidst the seeming chaos. Ask Stephen, whose story we heard this morning. In the hands of a crowd that has lost its conscience and plugged its ears, stones can become cruel instruments of death. Yet in the face of heavenly defiance, the very rocks that pummel Stephen become tools of life and witness to the power and the mercy of God. Stephen is so single-minded, so focused on Jesus, so willing to forgive his perpetrators as they perpetrate, which is what he learned to do from his Lord on the cross. And a rock maybe isn't all that different from a cross in this sense, that God will use anything and work through any circumstance to show us love and purpose. That's what Joseph told his brothers when he forgave them for having done such terrible things for him at the end of Genesis. He said, "You meant evil for me, but God meant it for good." Or as another translation says, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for the saving of many lives." Say it however you will, there is greater love that can be brought out of meaningless, random violence. And God is in the midst of that reclamation as its author. 5 smooth stones from a creek to the temple of Goliath, and David wins in single combat, saving the lives of thousands of his kinsmen and opposing Philistines that day. You never know what form your rescue will take. Some stones are quite a bit larger, at least so big that they cannot fit in David's sling. Maybe you heard it in the psalm today, the prayer, "Be my strong rock, you are my crag and my stronghold." You can see the author waiting out the storm under the cleft of the rock, hiding from his enemies, getting out of bad weather, grateful for it, thinking, this is what God is like. God is my safety and my shelter. The author of the first epistle of Peter may be glad for all these metaphors, but now he asks us to return our gaze once more to the stone walls in this room. Present yourselves to Jesus, who is the living stone, he says, and imitate him. Be before Jesus as living stones. What do you think he means? What a curious image that is. Have you ever seen a stone that was alive? Have you ever chatted up a rock? Other than maybe your pet rock in 1975? The dean needs some newer examples for preaching. But no, Peter remembers. The temple in Jerusalem was the center of religious life in ancient Israel. The temple was a formidable edifice set on Mount Zion. And the people looked to those great stones piled on one another, and they said, surely here is the presence of God. And they brought sacrifices to that place to express their gratitude for what the Lord had done. The temple was desecrated and brought low. And so the teaching had to change. We may not have the temple in a physical form anymore. We may not have the law written on those stone tablets, but surely we have written the law on our hearts. And where we go, the law of God reigns because we are a great light to the nations. And in us, the stones of the temple live and breathe. We are the house of God. Where you go, you are the home of God. The truth of it holds. Let you be a spiritual house, says the author of 1 Peter. Let Jesus be your cornerstone, he writes. Let the one that they rejected be the very head. And if that confounds your enemies, then love them all the more, for you will not be put to shame. For once you were not a people, but now in Christ you are God's people. That is, in Jesus, we are no longer individual testimonies, but one cohesive testimony. No longer individual stones, but an organized whole, a whole temple's worth of stones. We've been taken out of the ground down in Cowley County. We've been blown out, cut out, transported, laid out in walls, tooled and cleaned. That's fancy theological talk. It means we've been resurrected from long slumbering, set apart, formed for ministry, put in the right place at the right time, stacked up into an unmistakable message of grace, mercy, and redemption, worked into something beautiful together, and been forgiven by the King of glory, who will never give us up or let us go. God has made of us a spiritual house together. We are living stones, and on Christ, the solid rock, we stand.